Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and as always, it is a pleasure to come your way, especially when we have a pair of returning guests who provide us with some wonderful insights into ourselves and our lives. We're going to be talking once again with a couple who has shared with us something I heard about back in the I'm going to say the mid 80s, maybe late 80s, sacred geometry. And what was weird, from my perspective anyway, was that it was coming from a group of people who believed in the philosophy of Christianity. And I'm going, wait a minute, that seems somewhat diametrically opposed. Well, we'll find out exactly why it's not, because it is something that's been around for centuries. Our guests are returning to our program who have written the book Sacred Geometry, the Universal Language of Divine Alignment. Gregory and Gail Hoag, welcome back to Tell Me Your Story. I have to say, the first time we were together, it was a real pleasure, and it is still the same wonderful opportunity for not just our listeners, but me to learn about what this is all about. Thanks for being with us.
You're welcome.
Oh, thank you for having us back.
Thank you, Richard. And it really is amazing that you were aware of sacred geometry back in the mid 80s, because that's when we got started. And there were many people who hadn't a clue when we were talking about sacred geometry and showing some of the tools that we were creating. People were very curious, that it was very engaging. However, when we would explain what it was about, they'd get this glazed look on their face like, what? So even though you said you found it through Christianity, which makes sense, actually, because as you well know, sacred geometry has amazing reflections through cathedrals, through many ways that architecture was created, particularly architecture that was designed to support people in coming to some kind of a spiritual connection. So, yeah, it's not too, surprising that you would have heard about it then.
Yeah.
But maybe you were also getting more into, some of the things that came through, some of the more esoteric parts of Christianity, for sure.
I would say one of them, because this just came to mind, was Edgar Casey in particular. I mean, he was a devout Christian, and yet they wrote all of these books about his trance states and the channeling and so forth. And I even read a book probably 30 years ago called A Communication with the Spirit World of God by Johannes Graber, who also channeled, he was a priest in the Catholic Church back in the 30s, if I'm remembering the stories correctly. And he struggled with it as well, but yet, as much as he may have struggled, just as Edgar did, still persisted, still continued to go into these trance states. And Johannes even has which I have a copy of, a translation of the New Testament as it was given to him. And one of my favorite passages that I have read that is translated by King Jimmy as, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and all his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you." Johannes Graber's book, his translation is, "Seek ye first communication with the spirit world of God, and all these things will be added unto you." And in our conversations, not just the three of us here, but in my conversations with other guests, it is the conversations, if you will, the communications, the interactions, however you want to phrase it, with those on in the, whether you want to say the other dimensions, on the other side, such as we speak of our loved ones, my sister, my father, et cetera, et cetera. They, if you will, have so much to offer us, to give us. And sacred geometry is one of those elements. One of the first symbols that just comes to mind right now is the tree of life. And if you have ever looked at the tree of life, now think about this. Now think back to the original series, Star Trek. And you are looking at the Enterprise from the bow to the stern. You're looking at it head on from the bow. You see a shape that exists in the Kabbalah or the tree of life. There's no accident there. I don't know whether Gene Roddenberry, who may or may not have designed the original ship, was it, because I haven't researched him enough to know this. But anyway, I found the entire shape of the tree of life to be fascinating. Is there, shall we say, an origin, or are we going all the way back beyond, shall we say, the Big Bang to the great intelligence, or as it has been described? I think it was by Jung, who says there is one mind and we're all part of it, that has been in existence since, if there is such a thing as the beginning. But now we're talking infinity. But is there an origin as far as the two of you have researched?
Yes and no. I mean, it's like, what are you talking about, Richard? You're talking about now science is beginning to postulate very seriously multiverses, and
Mhm.
that the universe that we live in, they've also doubled the age. It's now 27 billion, not 13.5 billion. So,
Wow.
it really speaks to the fact that we have no idea. When you're dealing with infinity, how are you going to pack it into words that you can communicate with someone else?
Mhm.
It's always going to fall short.
Yeah.
Truth doesn't exist in this dimension where we're communicating via words, we're reading things, we're hearing things. Truth doesn't exist on this level. It's all relative. It's always a perspective. And so you're throwing one perspective, I'm throwing another perspective back. But, even thinking of the Big Bang, I always used to call it more the Big Leap, where
Mhm.
it's moving from one-dimensional reality into this dimensional reality and fills out. But there's always something before. And I know when I started communicating with higher dimensional beings, with beings beyond the dimensions, even, and they always looked further up and further in. It's like, how do you deal with the infinite? And yes, there's seems to be, not just seems to be, there's obviously intelligence, obviously consciousness that is there behind everything and percolating through everything. So it's how deeply do we want to look? And really, why are we looking? How does it serve us to discover that consciousness and then feel, oh, I am part of this. This is working through me as well as everything else. And how can I be in sync with that consciousness that will allow me to expand my vision, expand my opportunity, expand what I am doing in this world because once you discover that, it's like, oh, I need to share more of this, not to tell someone else, but because the sharing allows me to feel it pouring through. It's what an artist does, whether they're working with paint, dance, soup, whatever. When they are allowing that spirit consciousness to move through them, that is a divine state of being. And it's one that we all wish to share with each other, because it's in the sharing that the transfer of energy, the transfer of information, the transfer of love is happening.
You know, I think where I like to take this is there's a deep longing inside of every being to find out who we are, what is this universe, what is this consciousness that we're given. And the more that we take it, you know, whether it's historically or take it deeper, take it into, you know, questions like you're posing, the important thing is that we are evolving. We are conscious beings that are on an evolutionary path. And our egos are giving us one set of information. We are directing our lives in certain ways based on what, you know, our social systems tell us to do, what our education tells us to do. And yet inside within that, there's this deep hungering to find out who we are in relationship to the much grander picture. And I think that's always existed, you know, perhaps existed before this cosmos, who knows? And yet something that we found that we talk about in our book is that it's quite extraordinary how creation has specific rhythms and patterns and cycles and ways that everything is created. So there's mathematics and calculations to all of that. However, what holds it all together is consciousness. And that consciousness is love. Without that, there is nothing. Nothing exists. And so I believe that so much of what we're doing is we're trying to figure out what is this? What is this expansion of love that goes from something that we just can't even put words into to creating this absolutely spectacular universe? What the heck is it? And I don't think our language can really properly direct us. But that's where things like art comes in. That's where, you know, we get to express ourselves in many different ways. And we find that there are things that just pop into our minds that make us really curious about what something is. So whether it's Gene Roddenberry or whomever that creates something that is that may have a similarity to the tree of life, it's that desire of finding who are we on a much grander scheme than how we spend our everyday life. And we hunger for that, you know, and I think particularly we're in this amazing time where people are waking up and they're asking questions and they're going on vision quests and they're doing all kinds of things, not knowing why, but knowing they need to. And they're just following this wonderful trail to explore the depths of what this magnificent life is and who they are. So, I mean, it's such a fun time that we're in, and it's also a very challenging time because there's, you know, there's not a clear roadmap, but there certainly are so many people who are finding,
Mhm.
they're just being inspired to find who are they at a level that they never talked about before.
Well, what I find fascinating about these programs and the path that they take collectively over the course of time is there was a series of programs that focused more on wisdom. That was the sort of the subject of several programs. Lately, however, the latest endeavor has to do with more our physical mortal origins than are necessarily our more esoteric spiritual consciousness, if you will, origins, which does sort of open up that second door, if you will. And matter of fact, have an interview coming up with a second interview with a guest who basically has a documentary and a wonderful, huge coffee table book on events that took place back in the 70s regarding what we refer to today. You know what? And I don't care what the government likes to change the acronyms because they like to keep us confused, I guess. UFOs, extraterrestrials, aliens, if you will, from other worlds. And the speculation, of course, is that we're not indigenous to this planet. We were actually brought here for whatever purpose we were brought here for and so forth. And yet all of that seems to go by the wayside. When we start looking, for example, at sacred geometry, we start taking a look at these aspects. The knowing, and this was sort of brought up in one of my personal growth programs, one of the programs I went through, where an individual was going through, they were reliving the trauma and they were da and asking the question, why this, why that, why that? And the facilitator, being as kind as possible, said, if you knew the reason why, how would that change your life? What difference would that make in you right now where you are? If you knew why your father beat you, or your mother drank, or your brother or sister committed suicide, and the list goes on and on. And I hear this quite often these days from people. For example, gee, I wonder why I like pineapple. Why do I like comedies? Why do I? And the list goes on and on. And the point I'm working towards is this. It seems as though the sacred geometry, as you folks have researched and so forth, and in your book, Sacred Geometry, are actually wanting us to, in one sense, let go of the question why, because that takes us out of the now, this moment where we are not just the three of us conversing, having this conversation, but as an individual, maybe spending time, as we promote on this program, going within, listening to that still small voice. Because in 10,000 years, this conversation and our lives, who's going to remember and who's going to care? I mean, we are energy. We will still exist. In what form? I have no idea. Doesn't matter, because it's not now. It's not here. Do you find that a lot of folks, when you've communicated, or maybe you're holding seminars or workshops, what have you, lectures, did you find that because of the intellect you mentioned earlier about the ego, the intellect, if you will, it's not even in the now, and yet it's I don't know if I want to say part of our purpose is to raise our consciousness to a level where we're not living in the past or the future, because neither of them, at least for us in the mortal form, neither of them exist anymore. They exist
Yes.
on those dimensional levels.
Mhm, mhm.
Okay. But not in the not with us Me with the physical body, you with the physical body, and so forth. Talk to us a little bit about the importance and how sacred geometry can help us. I mean, you make reference to the fact that it can change one's life, but in terms of changing one's life so that they're here now in the moment, experiencing, and I guess I could say enjoying the ride, the journey. I know that's big.
Yes. Well, you talked for a while and you had a lot of things to unpack. So it is possible to be in the now. And that's one of the things I enjoy so much about being on podcasts with people, because I have no idea what I'm going to say. It's not like I'm sitting here taking notes and then come back with, no, it's literally being able to be in the moment and allow my lips to move and allow my heart to beat and be present with this energy that is going back and forth, and talk about, the quantum aspect of it. You're not here in front of me physically, and yet we feel connected.
Mhm.
Somewhere through the ethers, we're connecting. So now I'm going to go back and unpack some of the things that you were talking about,
Okay.
like being here on this planet. I mean, there's a lot of research that's coming out that shows about 200,000 years ago, there was a major shift with humanoid beings. We have 23 chromosomes, one less chromosome than an ape has. So they've got more chromosomes, and yet we are within about 90% the same, 95% the same in everything that's inside our bodies. And yet there was a change that happened a couple 100,000 years ago where two chromosomes in our body were fused. And they can even point to that chromosome and see some of the things that it's working with. And it seems to have a sense of what we were talking about earlier, that spiritual yearning, that spiritual opening. Something about the divine started being able to resonate with us a couple 100,000 years ago. And we have been virtually unchanged for the last 200,000 years in terms of the way we look and pretty much the way we are.
Mhm.
So now, coming forward, human beings do get into the why. And if they keep whapping things with a why without ever really wanting to know the answer, and the only way you can really know the answer to the why is to set yourself down a bit and not take yourself so personally, and start to go back up to a higher level and look at Richard and say, oh, what's Richard doing now? I can really look at him and see what he used to do. And, I won't pick on you. I'll talk about Gregory, this character that's
Yeah.
dancing around. We're all this, we so much are the same inside, all of us. We all have these same desires. And then we all have these same issues that come up. And it's like we don't feel worthy, and we get whacked around by the universe. And you go, oh my God, my life is so hard. It's not working. Then if you really get into someone else's moccasins, as the Indians used to say, walk a mile in them, you find out, no, I'm pretty happy with my life. It's not as messed up as I thought. We're messed up together, but we're also looking for these whys together. And if you can, in a situation, something happens, you can see the divine aspect from a little bit higher perspective. you can start to see, oh, this isn't just a bad thing. My mother drinking, my father beating, my whatever the issues are. What did I learn from that? Where am I now? How am I able to process compassion differently because of that? If you take it in a bigger context, if you take it from a higher perspective, you can learn the reasons for the whys. If it isn't real clear, let it go and just be present. There'll be another why coming along soon enough. You don't have to deal with that one. There are plenty of whys to deal with.
Yeah.
And, you know, you deal with enough whys, you'll become more wise. You know, what
And-
what do you have to say about that?
That's pretty good. I like that. I like that play on words. You know, I was texting the other day with a gentleman, a good friend of mine. He's in the business, and we were just joking around, having some fun on the text and everything. And because you mentioned this, and I put this together in the context of, and he knew where I was coming from. And I was talking about some of the conversations that were going on the radio that he was running, but I was monitoring and so forth. And I was joking around about the subject, for example, of racism. And I said, okay, well, from my perspective, here's the deal. We're going to base racism, let's see, on the color of your blood. And then we're going to, and I just stupid, ridiculous, crazy stuff. When in fact, we're all the same. As a matter of fact, and I don't think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think he quoted, maybe it was Carl Sagan, who said that we are all made from stardust. We contain the same elements in the periodic table that are out there in the universe. So even as far as the universe is concerned on the material level, we are the universe, elementally, if you will. And yet we manage to find ways to separate ourselves from one another.
You know, I've been thinking about one of the big quandaries that we deal with as a human being is we are mortal, right? Once we land in this body, the clock is ticking, right? The body is it's gonna grow to a certain level and then it's gonna start declining. And then we have this immortal soul. We have this, even just looking at this planet, we know that the planet is ever changing and growing, evolving, but its timeline is way different than ours. Its timeline is, you know, billions of years probably. I mean, who knows? When ours may be, you know, a maximum of 100 years, let's say. And then here we are, this immortal soul, this everlasting soul, landing in this limited time frame. And it's kind of like, oh my gosh, you've just taken this enormous vibration of soul, this cosmic energy of all that is and oneness, and tried to squish it into this little limited body and life that's only going to be a speck of, you know, just a certain amount of years in the whole timeline of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you know, you can look back and you could, you know, kind of sit back and go, what kind of a joke is that? And that's an interesting question, right? But
Yeah.
the other way of looking at it is, how do we make this life that we're in right now, this body, how do we make it timeless? How do we extract the limitations from it? And that's where we, in sacred geometry, with the work that we've been doing, that's really been a big part of it, is helping us be present in the moment. Because when we are present in the moment and putting out our antennas to be multidimensional beings and have access to the oneness of who we all are, then not only are we fully present, but we're timeless. We are eternal in those present moments. We are absolutely eternal. And then our mind wants to come in and try and figure the darn thing out. You know, I mean, if only I can figure out how to do this again, I can keep doing it. And that's when you ruin it, right?
Yeah.
So sacred geometry, what I love about it is it shows us that everything is set up in these perpetual patterns and cycles and rhythms and energies. Energy it's never ending. You know, you can't take it out of the system. You can't destroy it. And so when we go back into those roots of the eternal, then that's when, you know, we let go of all these filters and the ways that we try to figure out who we are and what are we doing here and how do we be a better person, and instead let go of it, breathe, reach out into who we are, into the eternal of who we are, and bring it here. Bring it here in the moment the best way that we possibly can, the way that universe is constantly creating itself over and over and over again. And
Yeah.
let go of our beliefs that want to tell us all this other stuff.
Yeah. And it's, as I've observed, there is all of that other stuff is truly irrelevant. And again, this sounds strange to some folks, because when you make this statement, obviously it's intended to be what you say it's not. But I say, with all due respect, the concepts, for example, in the Declaration of Independence of life, liberty, and the inalienable rights, and all of those aspects of individuality on a higher level, when you push away all that other stuff, they're not wrong, they're not bad, they're irrelevant. If we are all one, there is no individuality, and that is okay. Because we were all put here together. We're at 8.1 billion. They say by, what is it, 2040, 45, something like that, we might be at 9 to 10 billion people. Now, I'm not here to discuss whether or not the planet can handle that. That's not the point. The reality is that instead of each of us having our own individual planet, Class M planet to live on, which there are, they say, the potential of billions, if not trillions, that's not where we are. We're all here together. That has to mean something. And it's not necessarily to answer any of the why questions. It's just to put a finer point on the fact that you have a beautiful website that it's entitled I Connect all.com. I Connect to all.com. And that all is, if I am using the word correctly, literally all. And that's not just the physical. That's the non-physical, the dimensional, the multidimensional, however you want, connected to it all. And when you think about that, I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about this. Hopefully there's less to unpack this time. It's as if you have chosen a vocation, for example, and this all contains all of the tools, the elements, the protocols, whatever it is that allows you to carry out this vocation. It's all there. You don't even have to, where did I put that? Where is that? It's right there. with you right now. You don't even have to ask for it. And before you dive into that, I want to remind our listeners, Gregory and Gail Hoag are our guests, authors of Sacred Geometry, the Universal Language of Divine Alignment, here on Tell Me Your Story. Please expound on that a little bit in terms of why that is. Okay, I'll say it. Why that is so important to recognize that not only is there no separation, there is total and complete connection to all.
You know, the New Age community has been mouthing those words for a long time, and yet we still seem to all be separate. We still have the good guys and the bad guys, and the ones we like and the ones we judge and the ones, but it's possible as we expand in consciousness, individually, each one of us can become more of a we, more of a we than an I. And that's the journey. That's the journey of coming into the physical dimension. It's like coming in as a little being, and the way we're raised, the terrible twos, it's just the little being starting to go, hey, me, I'm discovering me. Oh, wow. This is the world in relationship to me. What are my needs? And I think last time we may have shared an image of an iceberg and how we're like an iceberg where just the tip is seen, the majority is hidden. So that's the process of our lives in the physical dimension, is to go from that little tip of the iceberg, where that's where the ego hangs out. That's where my reality is, which is obviously limited. There's not enough stuff to go around in this reality. I've got to take some of my stuff, or you're going to take more than your share. And we get into this struggle, and we get into things don't always work out. And, all this stuff that we talked about a few moments ago that bring up the whys and all these things. So the opportunity and what we've been discovering is this is part of the description of sacred geometry, is how we're structured as human beings. Just a little bit shows up here, but there's a lot more that exists on these higher dimensional levels. That's where even our emotions exist in the aura around us. Some people can see those colors and see those emotions. And those emotions are hanging out there. They actually go out and they bump into other people. I've been, from a higher perspective, speaking with an auditorium of people and seeing that people often sit next to people who have similar issues, who have similar ways of looking at the world, have similar ways of being. You can see it in their colors. You can see it in their thought forms, because that's another level of dimensionality, is thought form, stuff that works inside the brain and outside the brain. It goes out into the universe, because the brain is, that's in here in this coconut, but the mind, awareness, can be far beyond the body, can be drawing information in from universal principles and places that, when brought into the physical body through the heart, can occupy the brain, and incredible things can come out of the mouth and be said. But you see, what we have discovered with sacred geometry is, and all we're saying it is the way everything is happening. It's the way the universe is dancing and moving on an atomic level, on a galactic level. the universe has patterns it follows. And the thing is, it's the way the universe is dancing. And if we choose to dance with the universe, the way it's doing things, it's going to affect us in the way we're doing things. And eventually, our doingness starts expanding into more of a beingness.
Mm.
And as we expand into a being, that's when we can be present moment to moment, because we're not doing anything, we're just being. And we don't have to think about what we're going to say because it's being said through us. It's our beingness allowing a bigger part of ourselves to come through. And the more we expand into that larger aspect of who we are, and the more we allow that to be part of our fullness, then, the ego starts. I mean, you can't, some of the old language, kill the ego or whatever. No, it's got us a long ways. I mean, it's done a lot of good for us. It just wants things to do. It wants to be valued. We want, that's part of our self-worth. It's not just, you're okay, you're going to live forever. But, at the moment, I want to feel good about it. And that's where the ego comes in. So you give the ego things to do. He can put on a shirt. He can sit here in front of a camera and talk to Richard and feel good about it. And he can be part of the play. He may
Yeah.
not be running the play, but he can be part of it.
That's true.
And then what starts to happen as we expand, we start to feel these connections more and more. We start realizing that compassion is coming through where you go, I have to really respect this reflection of myself, that there is much more going on than I can imagine. And that's when we start to feel the allness of it, the connection to everything. And I think it was just before we got on with you, someone was visiting us and was asked us a question, said, can I film this or on my camera? And okay. But what came up was this poem from Rumi that I remembered, which is, you are not the drop in the ocean, but you are the ocean in a drop. And when you expand to that level of allowing, then that's when the power and the light and the love becomes so overwhelming that you realize this is a great place to be.
Makes me think of the image of a hologram. I remember a movie in high school, and they had this big sheet of glass, and they had treated it in some fashion to where when they took this picture of this structure, whatever it was, and imprinted it on this glass, and then they broke it. They broke the glass. And when you picked up every single piece of glass, the whole image was in each piece. And there's a process that I go through, for example, in sound editing, in what's referred to as the multi-track session. It's called non-destructive editing. And I can take the same file and I can cut it up into a bunch of little pieces. Now, in the multi-track session, all you see are those little pieces. But if you double click on that little piece, guess what's there? The whole audio file. Same holographic example.
Mhm.
And that's what we are.
Yeah.
And that's what we haven't really been taught that. And I sometimes think that in spite of, or maybe because of, the errors in editing by the powers that be way back when in the ancient wisdom teachings, specifically the Bible, they left things in that tell us these very things, that you are God's, that you are a part of, or you are part of the body. One other is in terms of the putting women in their place, for example, in those days, for example, in second class and all that kind of stuff. And yet they left in who saw and recognized the Christ following his crucifixion and his resurrection. It was a woman. Oops, we should have taken that out of there. That was a mistake, because, it's like, yeah. And so it's both sides of the spectrum that are discovering things that are part of the process. And yet the ego within others says, no, we can't do that, because that gives that person or that class or that group, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, no, we're all part of the same creation, physically as well as spiritually. We're talking about sacred geometry, and I am wanting to ask this question because I know someone is out there thinking this.
Mm-hmm.
What makes sacred geometry sacred as opposed to the geometry that I took in high school that I didn't do so well at, but I got through it?
Well, it's fun that you're asking this question, because we have had so many people who've said to us, if only I had learned geometry like what you're talking about now, I would have loved it.
Yeah.
Because there was a depth and a context to it that they really were wanting to help bring it all together. But what really makes it sacred is that we're going from just, I think the way we learned the way we learned geometry when we were in school was very mental, very analytical.
Mhm.
This is the way it is, and remember these theorems and blah, blah, blah. I mean, to some people, that's fine. But there's a lot of people that wanted to, say, well, so what? So what? I mean, and then, I remember the first time when I opened a book by Buckminster Fuller, who was the brilliant guy who created the geodesic dome. And he's talking about geometry, and he's got these tetrahedrons in there. And for the first time, I'm looking at these going, this is so amazing, because what he's talking about is how energy travels into form, how form is created in such a manner that it really works, physically on this planet. I would have loved to have known that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So something that, when we use the word, what's sacred, what is sacred in our lives? What has meaning? What nourishes me at the soul level? What enables me to feel connected? And that's what I believe sacred geometry answers those questions. When you apply sacred geometry in architecture, for instance, like we've talked about at the very beginning, and you have temples, cathedrals, sacred sites, all kinds of things, the way that they were structured was to help people feel connected, so they could actually ascend to higher levels of who they are, get beyond just their ego and their mental chatter, and instead connect to the allness of what is. And that's sacred. When we create tools, we always looked at what are the principles, what are the ways that we can structure these tools so that they are tools of connection. They are not, something like a toothbrush that allows you to brush your teeth faster or better.
Mhm.
But it's something that helps me be a more evolved conscious being. That's sacred. So, you know, the sacredness can be expressed that way. It also, I think, something that's sacred is something that you can count on. In other words, the principles are usable over and over and over again. There's some quality to the principles of sacred geometry that you know, they're dependable. They're anchors. They help me be and understand who I am here in this physical body, and my soul resonates with it. You know, I can't tell you how many times we've had people that will see some of our structures and say, "Oh my gosh, I just saw that in a dream last night." It's like, well, you know, that's what is sacred, that it connects with us on those multitudes of levels.
You know,
And
go
Richard,
ahead. Go ahead,
I
Gregory.
just want to say, you know, a simple way of putting it, the connections Gail's talking about, it's literally energy is moving. Energy is moving back and forth. A resonance is created. Just like a C tuning fork will start to resonate with a C tone. So if we look at the way universe structures itself and then follow some of those patterns and rhythms and cycles and bring them into our life, as we've talked about with tools, what's possible is that these elements, these pieces of geometry can connect, like Gail was talking about, and move energy. So geometry that is sacred is that which is able to move energy, and as Gail was saying, create connection between every aspect of being.
I think about what you've just said, and what flashed into my mind was the cross section. It sounds kind of weird. Oh yeah, my chainsaw is part of sacred geometry. And I say that because when I cut through the trunk of the tree that I am preparing to be used as firewood for next season, I am seeing the cross section of that tree. I am seeing the growth, the expansion of that tree over the decades that it lived, and the early years of its challenge, the inner rings, if you will, that are darker and less uniform and so forth, until you get further out, and now it's much stronger, and the rest of the wood all the way out to the bark is pristine. It's beautiful. It's almost a vanilla, if you will, color. It's just gorgeous. And as I've shared on this program, I love being out in nature. I love being outside, whether it is, you know, cutting up this tree or cutting the weeds down, obviously in preparation to mitigate any potential fire risks to our living space and so forth. But I can even set that aside, and I just like being out there doing these things. It almost doesn't matter what the reason is. You know, going back to the whole thing. Why am I doing this? I don't care. It doesn't matter. It just feels right. It feels good. And that's one of the things that sacred geometry is. And it's also an astonishing achievement that this book in this respect, that wraps together, as we've been talking here, consciousness expresses itself in numbers, degrees, angles, atoms, frequencies, time, planetary alignments, and a whole lot more. Now, you touched upon sound, vibration, if you will, if we want to take it to a different level there. And there's geometry even in sound. Now, I'll remove the element of what a wave looks like in my editing software. Yeah, there's geometry in there because you have the angles and so forth of the wave. But let's just take that out of the mix. There is still an element of sacred geometry in the vibration, is there not?
Absolutely. Um, are you familiar with, well, I'm thinking originally it was Chladni figures, but and his name just ran out of my head as I'm getting ready to open my mouth. Cymatic images. Are, are you familiar with cymatics, where different frequencies are put through, say, a plate with sand on it, powder, or you
Yes.
have oil and water, and
Mhm.
different frequencies are put through? You get very precise geometries. And in the book, even I showed some. And what was interesting was you change the frequency and the pattern changes. And yet I recognize that as they changed the frequency, the pattern was a different view of a three-dimensional pattern that actually in the cymatic images, everything was done on a flat plate or in a dish with water. So everything was two-dimensional.
Mhm.
But what they were doing with the sound was giving you slices of three-dimensional patterns, literally. So sound is, and Goethe even referred to it as geometry as frozen music, because he
Oh.
recognized that music and combinations of notes creates geometries, and that when you freeze it into a single image of a geometry,
Mhm.
but music works real time,
Right.
continuously. And we have a number of friends that work with sound healing because it is very physical. It works with the body. It carries some of these vibrations that we know everything is vibration. Everything is constantly moving on an atomic level and within us and and all around us.
Mhm.
And that when we can bring in certain frequencies, we can shift or give the space for the body to then open up into a higher frequency. And there are certain things in our book where we've talked about certain patterns of the way energy works, and it follows the whole electromagnetic spectrum is carried by a photon, and a photon has a geometry. And that geometry, when you break it down into degrees, 4,320 degrees, it's a harmonic of the radius of the sun at 432,000 miles is the radius of the sun.
Mhm.
And 432 squared is working with the speed of that photon, the speed of light. And that 432, there's an argument in the community working with sound. Should they set middle A at 432 hertz or 440 hertz? And the thing is, if the sun and light and the photon are all working with this harmonic
Mhm.
with sound, we're totally at choice. You know, how we're going to bring out a sound, what we're going to use to make that sound and generate it. And if we're working with 440 hertz for middle A or 432, I would suggest 432 because it's in resonance harmonically with energy, with the sun, with the speed of light. And it's what the people that, or the beings, I should say, that built the Great Pyramid at Giza they worked with that in a number of ways, where they bring in 432 because they realize it's a harmonic and it works with sound, it works with light, it works with physical matter. And so that's the whole game that we're playing, how to get things to relate to each other through harmonics. And if we bring the same numbers in, if it may be in degrees, it may be in time, it may be in distance, all different measures, miles versus degrees versus years. And yet when they have the same numbers, there's a harmonic resonance.
Mm.
So a cube is 2,160 degrees. A year, or excuse me, an age of the zodiac is 2,160 years.
Mhm.
And the distance of the diameter of the moon is 2,160 miles. And all these elements start working with energy relationship.
There's another element that I'll add to that, and I know the two of you are familiar with the Japanese scientist some years ago,
Mhm.
who I think he's since passed. Be that as it may, his
Mhm.
his,
He
Yes,
his
he
research
has.
came about with water crystals, and emotion, and how it
Mhm.
affected the crystalline structure of water, and that he took pictures of. And and again, I don't know exactly how he expressed the emotion, if he spoke to the water, or he had people come in there who were angry, or happy, or whatever it was. But we're talking now about something that is now beyond, if again, not that because I don't know how the experiments were done, but beyond this, the aspects of sound. Now we're getting a lot more esoteric, a lot more uh non-material, if you will, or I'll go there, spiritual, if you will.
Yeah. Well, people have sung to their plants and
Mhm.
seen that they grow better. Um, Goodness, we do that to the people we love, I
Yeah.
mean, we all respond to all of these different vibrational qualities. It's not just words.
Yeah.
It's the energy is really
Yeah.
what's going on.
By the
And
way,
so-
there was a gentleman I saw in a video who was playing his violin, and he had a field of corn. And his neighbors, who also were growing corn, wondered why his corn was 15 feet tall instead of 10. And he said, well, it's because I play the violin for them every day.
Mhm. Yeah,
Mhm.
why not, right?
Yeah.
And earlier, it was interesting. You were talking about Dr. Emoto and the work that he did with water. And sometimes they would just tape a word, but people that, excuse me, were interacting with the water,
Mhm.
they understood what that word meant. The energy went in. Sometimes they would have groups of people. But the interesting thing to me is if the values of love and joy that were expressed create the most perfect geometry, what about going in the opposite direction? Can the most perfect geometry affect our experience of love and joy?
Mhm.
And that's where sacred geometry comes into play. Because he's saying, okay, our thoughts and our consciousness can affect this water and the geometry. Likewise, that perfect geometry can affect our consciousness and our beingness.
And I would think that if an architect were to incorporate sacred geometry into whatever it is that they're designing, that it could certainly have an impact on those who reside within it, whether it be an office building or a family dwelling, if you will, like the geodesic dome or a pyramid, and so on and so forth. There are people who will sit under a pyramid, for example, and it's not necessarily, four walls, and so forth. Sometimes it's just the copper corners, if you will, the corners of the pyramid, going to the peak and coming down and so forth. And they'll put a chair in there or what have you. They'll sit in there and they report that they experience some very profound things.
Definitely. And that's what we've been doing with our tools for close to 40 years. When I first felt these tools that Gregory had created and we really didn't know what we were dealing with at that point. There was energy. I could feel energy coming off. So my next thought was, well, if I can feel energy, what can you do with that? And going back into, connecting to higher intelligence, because I couldn't go find a book in the library about this, I realized that these are like antenna systems and support us in those divine connections.
Mm.
And when we are more connected on those higher levels, then things start coming into play that really change our lives.
Mhm.
They allow our relationships to work better. They allow our creativity and our intuition to be heightened. All of these different things happen, and it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Because my gosh, when you go walking in a beautiful place in nature, why you're drawn to doing that all the time is because you feel more of who you are. You feel inspired, you feel creative, you feel like you're breathing better, all kinds of wonderful things that we humans all need.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I would like for you to talk a little bit about the tools that you have created, but also that are available through your website. I connect to all. That's the letter I, connect, the number 2, all.com. Can you share with us about some of these tools and
Okay.
their purpose?
Yeah, and you know what? I think we're going to do that rather quickly and start out with a slide
Okay.
that we want to invite people to check out our book, because they will get so much information through the book. And also the last chapter of the book brings together the work that we've done with these different tools.
Yeah. And by the
And
way, I
so
love the shape, the geometric shape on the cover of the book. That is really cool looking. I love that.
thank you.
And that is an image, a photograph I took of one of the geometries that we made. So we make geometries that are like the ones turning next to me right now, that are antenna systems that can shift the energy in an environment, in your home where you live. And also, if we go back to these images for people that can see, the pendants that both Gail and I are wearing have about 35 antenna systems inside. We found ways to take three-dimensional geometries and put them into a two-dimensional antenna system. And the images are actually gold on a non-conductive background so that they collect energy and put it out. And what happens is it shifts the energy that's coming into a human being, so it's at a higher frequency. And it makes the energy coming out of you also at a higher frequency. That's why things happen where prison guards will find that prisoners treat them better. Grandmothers say their grandkids stop running away from them and start crawling all over them. They're attracted to the energy.
Yeah.
People shift and they don't even realize how many things are going on in this world. And there are the toxins in the environment, the electromagnetic frequencies, all the negative news that's out there, the fear that's generated. All these different things are affecting us, And we look at sometimes the people next to us and go, it's your fault. I'm feeling this way because of you. And it's like, no, 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 you're just feeling bad because that's the state of what your body is involved with right now. And if you can lift someone out of that negative soup that we're walking around in all day long and start to feel a vibration that, like we were likening it to being in nature a little while ago, and feeling that natural order of things. Nature works because it's all following what nature does. The geometries are right. Everything is right. It's working together the way it's supposed to, as long as we don't go in and try to fix it and try to make it different. Whenever we do that, we have problems.
Yeah.
So,
This is
so
true.
Richard, I think the easiest thing for people to do is actually go to our website.
Mhm.
And that was, can you put back that slide that has
I
website
connect to
address?
all.com.
iconnectall.com with the number 2.
Mhm.
And actually, and if you put /chapter, we're offering people a free chapter, the first chapter on consciousness. So go there and download our chapter, and also check around, and you'll see all of our different products, our different tools, and lots of different information about it. We've got a ton of different YouTube videos, lots and lots of different things. And we would love to invite people to check it out and see what really calls to them.
And that's
And
go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I was
please
just
go ahead.
I was going to say that we've started roughly on the first Thursday, the third Thursday of each month, reading our book and then explaining it, going off into the offshoots, the tangents that are fun to go off in explaining, well, what does this mean? And answering questions. So get on our mailing list, by going into our website and be part of that, because we're having a good time.
Absolutely. Is the book, and again, to me, the experience that you are offering, I think, is a wonderful one. It actually goes a bit beyond just being audible, but is the book recorded? Is it audible?
It's not right now.
Okay.
It was a lot of work just to get it written,
Oh,
Richard.
I'm sure. Oh, no, no, no. I've got a copy of it at home, and
Yeah.
I flip through it every so often, and it's just intriguing to me. But I'm sure someday that will come about.
Yeah,
This,
I think we will.
go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, well, then you and I, the three of us, will have to talk about that, because it's something that I do on my end is
Oh,
create audible recordings. In addition to narrating, I also will take the authors or whoever they choose to have read it, and I've done a few books like that. So it's a lot of fun for me because not only do I get to read their book through the process, whether I'm narrating it or following along the narrator. But I also get to produce and listen to the finished product. To me, it's just fascinating, and I love doing that because I get to go in, as I have described before. These interviews are like Christmas morning. I get to open up a package, a present, and that present happens to be, in this case, your worlds, the two of you, and what you have to offer. And I will go in there and I'll look around, and maybe there's little bits and pieces that, hey, I'm going to take that with me. I want to incorporate that into my life, my philosophy, my way of being, and so forth, and so forth. And that's how I look at it. So I'm looking forward to that opportunity. And I want to thank the two of you for coming back again here on the program to talk about sacred geometry, what it is all about, and in many instances, by describing what it is, it tells us what it isn't. And I look forward to a future conversations with the two of you here on Tell Me Your Story.
thank you. Thank you. It's
Oh,
always a pleasure to be with you, Richard.
we have fun going down all these different tangents. And may your next present be presents.
Absolutely. The here and the now.
Yes.
Folks, I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices help make your dreams come true. And just to remind you, we're here Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m. for a special edition of Tell Me Your Story, and our original slots, if you will, 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Sunday and 1 a.m. Monday morning, streaming live at those times at richarddugan.com. The podcasts are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and many other locations. We're on YouTube, where you will be able to see much of what we've been talking about in terms of the geometry that is, I want to say hanging, but it's positioned between Gail and Gregory on YouTube. You'll be able to see that, plus the other things that they have shared with us. And we also hope that if you can subscribe, we also hope you'll click notification. So when we put up a new conversation, you'll be able to go there and listen to it. And we also ask that if you can support the work we're doing financially, we'd be gratefully appreciative. We have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And they're going to ask you for an email address to whom you are sending. Put in richard@richarddugan.com. That's richard@richarddugan.com. And we thank you for those who have helped over the years and those who will help. It's always greatly appreciated. We also ask that you spend time during the decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, going within and listening to that still small voice. And it may very well guide you to some geometric shapes, designs, forms that might very well be beneficial to you in your home, your workplace, even in your car, or wherever it suggests that you have them. So it can do nothing more than, as Gregory has alluded, enhance that energy that is out there. I think of Tesla trying to access the, as is referred to, free energy that is all around us. And it is, and it's within us as well. So we hope that you will take time to go within. Until our next podcast, videocast, love to Lal. Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, continue to be happy, because I am. Smokey, I'll see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.